بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. معالي الدكتور محمد سليمان الجاسر رئيس مجموعة البنك الإسلامي للتنمية، معالي الدكتور أحمد كمالي نائب وزيرة التخطيط والتنمية الاقتصادية بجمهورية مصر العربية، أصحاب المعالي والسعادة، أيها الحضور الكريم، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته، ومرحبا بكم في منتدى البنك الإسلامي للتنمية السادس عشر للمالية الإسلامية الذي ينظمه معهد البنك تحت عنوان ريادة الأعمال الاجتماعية من أجل نماء مشترك. وفي البداية أود التنويه بأن مداولات هذا المنتدى سوف تكون باللغة الإنجليزية، ولكن قبل البداية خير ما نبدأ به آيات بينات من القرآن الكريم.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. الله لا إله إلا هو الحي القيوم لا تأخذه سنة ولا نوم، له ما في السماوات وما في الأرض، من ذا الذي يشفع عنده إلا بإذنه، يعلم ما بين أيديهم وما خلفهم، ولا يحيطون بشيء من علمه إلا بما شاء، وسع كرسيه السماوات والأرض ولا يؤوده حفظهما وهو العلي العظيم.
صدق الله العظيم. أحيل الكلمة الآن إلى سعادة الدكتور سامي سويلم مدير معهد البنك الإسلامي للتنمية، فليتفضل.
Shukran akhi Rami. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Very good morning to all of you. We welcome our distinguished guests, and on behalf of our colleagues, we welcome His Excellency the President or the Chairman of the Islamic Development Bank Group, as well as delegates and excellencies from the Ministries of Planning and Economics in Egypt and other officials from member countries. As we all know, Islamic Finance has a mission to impact the lives of the citizens and the communities of our member countries and worldwide. And for this, we have to have two dimensions. One is innovation, and the other is empathy and social responsibility. And that's why we have two sessions in this forum. One on the multi-dimensional poverty index that would help building the relationships across the communities and identifying the challenges and helping resolving them. And the other session on social entrepreneurship and how innovation can bring in value to our societies and communities. On your behalf, I would like to welcome Dr. Muhammad Al-Jasir, the Chairman of the Islamic Development Bank Group, to deliver his keynote. Your Excellency.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم، والصلاة والسلام على أفضل الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. Your Excellencies, honorable government officials, distinguished speakers and guests, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. On behalf of the Islamic Development Bank Group, I am delighted to welcome you all to the 16th Islamic Development Bank Global Forum on Islamic Finance. I thank all distinguished speakers and panelists for joining us today. The combined health and economic crises caused by the COVID-19 pandemic have resulted in rising poverty and widening inequalities. For the first time in 2 decades, extreme global poverty has increased. Evidence compiled by the World Health Organization and the World Bank shows that more than 500 million people had been pushed into extreme poverty before the pandemic, as they had to pay for health services out of their own pockets. The pandemic has made the situation worse. Equally challenging is the rising inequalities. Before the pandemic, inequality affected more than 2/3 of the world's population. The pandemic has exacerbated this situation. It has had a disproportionately negative effect on the incomes of vulnerable groups, mainly women, migrant workers, those employed in lower skilled occupations or informal sectors, and those with limited assets. Given that 1 in 3 people in our member countries lives in multidimensional poverty, it is no surprise that fighting poverty has always been at the core of our partnerships and engagements with our member states. The pandemic has further compelled us as a development institution to strengthen our efforts in this endeavor to ensure a more inclusive recovery in our member countries. With this objective in mind, the Islamic Development Bank has renewed its partnership with the Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiative. Building on the success of our previous collaborations, the Islamic Development Bank Institute and the Oxford Initiative have undertaken to publish a series of briefs in the coming years on multidimensional poverty to inform and enhance the Islamic Development Bank Group's evidence-based policies and interventions in our member states. It is satisfying to note that some member countries have reduced poverty significantly. The success stories of these countries should serve as a motivation for policymakers and development institutions that reducing poverty is possible despite high initial levels of poverty and other challenges. On the opposite, the experience of countries where poverty increased should teach us how to reorient our interventions for better impact. Distinguished speakers and guests, ladies and gentlemen, globally, there is a growing consensus that the intractable social problems facing humanity have proven to be very difficult to address through traditional vehicles such as government policy or market intervention. Furthermore, the pandemic has further exacerbated the public sector's capacity to address basic needs. Governments, especially countries, continue to experience severe constraints on servicing their external debt and supporting production, exports, incomes, and employment, even after the pandemic. Addressing major social issues requires reconsidering how public policy and market intervention are envisioned. In this context, there is a need to develop unconventional, socially responsible solutions to address unmet social needs. We need social innovations that create value by, among other things, filling the gaps left in the market, sometimes caused by market failures. Successful social innovation demonstrates durability, scalability, and transformative impact. In the broader social innovation ecosystem, social entrepreneurship plays a critical role as entrepreneurship is essential for innovation, job creation, and economic growth. Thank you very much for your attention. I wish you all the best in your deliberations and discussions. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for enlightening and insightful remarks. Now we have a video. Brother Habib, are you there? On the rebranding of the Institute.
Development Bank Institute has a long history as the recognized beacon of knowledge for the IsDB Group. Established in 1981 as the Islamic Research and Training Institute, we have evolved over the years, facilitating momentous milestones in Islamic economics. In 2021, we became the Islamic Development Bank Institute, strengthening our capacity as an integral arm of IsDB Group. This evolution has been manifested in our new visual identity. Our logo, which mirrors IsDB's globe, is a symbol of our global presence and continued collective growth, with dynamic shapes that embody our multifaceted function, and vibrant colors that reflect clarity, progress, vitality, and wisdom. Our new branding is modern, accessible, and evokes the passion and curiosity that is at the center of our research, collaboration, and development. It is this relentless pursuit of knowledge that has driven our impact so far and touched numerous lives, including the thousands of participants at our conferences and trainings. At IsDBI, we turn insights into ideas and harness our collective expertise to find knowledge-based solutions for key economic challenges such as poverty, inequality, and climate change. We support the welfare of future generations by nurturing the talents of young people and championing sustainable economic growth. By working collaboratively in our diverse and talented team, we're paving a path to a bright economic future for our communities around the world.
Thank you very much. I'd like to call on the panel to please join me up on stage. Dr. Sabina, Mr. Muhammad, Sami, and then also Dr. Ahmed Kamali. Is Dr. Kamali here yet or not yet? Please take your seats. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Good morning. I'm Dr. Arif Suleiman, the Director of Economic Research and Statistics at the Islamic Development Bank Institute. It is a pleasure to be with you this morning to moderate the first session, which focuses on the joint efforts by the IsDB Institute, the Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiative, with the support of the Ministry of Planning and Economic Development, where we've been specifically looking at multidimensional poverty in Egypt. The ISDBI and Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiative have been collaborating on multidimensional poverty in ISDB member countries for the past few years, with a view to providing an evidence-based analysis to support effective and efficient decision-making, as well as to better help us target our interventions. The President's already mentioned in his earlier interventions that 1 in 3 in our member countries live in multidimensional poverty, and the situation is even more dire in some instances where up to 90% of our populations in specific areas are in multidimensional poverty. Clearly, with the COVID-19 pandemic and the East European crisis, the situation has become worse and more dire. Our work has now become more relevant, and it's now more important as we speak towards building resilience and driving sustainable development in our member countries. We need novel and innovative solutions to tackle the problems of today. We are honored this morning to have with us 4 very distinguished guests, a very high-powered panel. We're hoping that Dr. Kamali joins us soon. He is on his way. Dr. Kamali, who is currently the Deputy Minister of Planning and Economic Development. He has a very rich and diverse experience in economic research and policy. He has also previously served as the chair in the Department of Economics at the American University of Cairo. He is was the director in the Egyptian Ministry of Investment, and also the Chief of Economic Governance and Planning at UNESCO. We also have with us today Dr. Sabina Al-Kai, who is the director of the Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiative. Sabina is also the Associate Professor of Development at Oxford, and together with Prof. James Foster, Dr. Al-Kai has developed the Al-Kai-Foster method for measuring multidimensional poverty. We have also with us today Mr. Muhammad Ashmawi, who illustrious track record in practical implementation. Mr. Ashmawi is currently the Vice Chairman and Managing Director of the Nasser Social Bank. He is former CEO of the Tahya Misr Fund and previously served as the United Bank Chairperson since its establishment in 2006. And he's also served as Deputy to the Board of Trustees at the Misr Al Khair Association. Last but not least, our host for today, Dr. Samuel Suelam, who is the Acting Director General at the Islamic Development Bank Institute and also the Chief Economist of the IsDB Group. Dr. Sami has extensive experience in both the academic and private sectors. He has served on several technical and advisory committees and is widely published in the space of Islamic economics and finance. We look forward to a very stimulating discussion this morning and hope that our deliberations will give us better insights into the nature and extent of multidimensional poverty, some of the policy implications, lessons learned, and also with Mr. Ashmawi in the panel this morning, practical examples of what is being done to address the issue of poverty or multidimensional poverty. Sabina, maybe we kick off with you just so that we're all on the same page. And for the rest of the session, can you give us a quick overview of multidimensional poverty, this index, why it was developed, how is it different from the traditional measures, and then perhaps just to set the stage also for when we're talking around Egypt, the difference between the global measure and a national measure. So Sabina, over to you.
Thank you so much. And I should say I'm just grateful to be here, grateful to the Islamic Development Bank Institute for their deep commitment, empathy, and rigor in looking at multidimensional poverty in member states, and also to the Ministry of Planning and Economic Development here in Egypt, which has been a leader in developing a national MPI, and indeed will be hosting a South-South network of 61 participating countries and 19 international institutions that work on multidimensional poverty and exchange lessons learned. So it's a delight to be here. When we speak about multidimensional poverty, we are putting ourselves in the shoes of the poor, and we are looking at the deprivations that, as Amartya Sen, Nobel Prize in Economics, said, batter and diminish their lives in many and various ways. So when the IDB speaks about 1/3 of the people in member states being multidimensionally poor, they are speaking about a global multidimensional poverty index, which, for example, looks at deprivations in health, education, and living standards. You are deprived if anyone in your household is undernourished, if sadly a child has died, if any child is not attending school through class 8, or nobody in your household has completed 6 years of schooling, if you lack safe water, adequate sanitation, electricity, clean cooking fuel, although not in the case of Egypt, or more than one of a small set of assets, or a good quality house. And if you are deprived not in one, but in a critical mass of these indicators, 1/3 of the dimensions, you are identified as multidimensionally poor. And using that global MPI, we are able to assess poverty across nearly 6 billion people in 109 countries in 2021, and look at who is poor, how they are poor, subnational decompositions by governorates, children, rural urban areas, female-headed households. For example, in the global MPI, we find that 2/3 of the poor live in households with no educated woman. So that is what a global multidimensional poverty index looks like. But it is talking about acute poverty. So 1/3 of people in member states are multidimensionally poor, but in Egypt, it's 1 in 20. And so that measure of acute poverty is not appropriate in certain countries that are on to a different stage of development. And they therefore create national MPIs whose dimensions and indicators reflect the appropriate definition of poverty for their policy priorities. For example, including work, higher standards of education and human capital, or environmental conditions, and different kinds of childhood deprivations. And many, many countries now have, including IDB member countries, have and report their national multidimensional poverty measures in the SDG database, for example. So that is when the two kinds of measures, a global measure which looks across all countries with a common yardstick, but perhaps is not so appropriate in very low poverty contexts like Egypt. And yet it can compare Niger with many other countries. And national measures tailored to context that you cannot compare. But the national measures are used as policy tools for budgeting, for targeting, for monitoring change over time, for coordinating across ministries. So like the decent housing and life programs in Egypt, you can have integrated multi-sectoral policies that are high impact and low cost. So our aim in measuring poverty in its many dimensions is to bring numeric evidence with all of the rigor to bear on the problem of poverty so that actors from different ministries are able to coordinate their work and reduce it faster as a sign of empathy.
But perhaps just one point is we're focusing today on shared prosperity. Poverty has a relationship between poverty, prosperity, just in a quick sentence.
95% of the people are not poor. And so there is a kind of shared prosperity in the 95. Why we focus on the 5% is that they are the ones whose lives we want to focus on and change. And poverty metrics gives a high resolution lens on people who do not enjoy well-being and prosperity so that we know what to do.
Okay, that's a good segue to the next part. Mr. Ashmawi, one of the issues in Egypt that one is focusing on is tackling the multidimensional nature of poverty. Now, coming from the Nasser Social Bank, what are your thoughts on the situation in Egypt and what is being done on the ground to make a bit of a difference?
Thank you very much, Mr. Arif, to give us the chance to introduce our Nasser Bank today. Actually, the strategy of Nasser Bank is driven through the MBI factors. poverty is not only in the income, poverty in the quality of living, the health, the education, the culture itself, sport, activities, financial inclusion. So we are going through a restructuring of the national bank since now 2 years. We build it on the different factors. For example, we are يعني emphasizing on two factors: the micro saving for encouraging people to start to save. This is include categorizations. We have a social saving for the orphans. This saving is very strange to say orphan and saving. No, it's saving created by donations, and this will be in a block account till the orphan self, the boy or girl, reached 18 years. We have a certain account, saving account, generously paid for senior citizens over 60. We have accounts for the handicap. So we illustrate the balance sheet to support each item. Even for the disability, poverty is part of the disability. Disability is a disease. If there is a poverty, there is a disability. If there is if we solve the poverty through increasing the income of the family or supporting the family, you will partially mitigate or mitigate it to a certain percent the final result of the disability itself. So it's all related to the financial inclusion. So in the other side, we provided finance. So Nasr Bank is Sharia compliant bank. Finance to the different genders. We have about half 500,000 ladies enjoying the microfinance in our bank, and we have a very bright successful success stories for ladies used to have a grant and pension from the government. They turn it in 2 or 3 years to a small business. They are hiring others. So what we are doing is taking the factors of MBI and analyze it and solve it. This is through our bank, our finance, and the government support financially, the government politically, beside allying with different institutions like all the civil social organizations, with Tahya Mas Fund, with Haya Karima programs. So we are acting as financial mediators between all the country tools and the way to reach actually the designated person who needs the support.
I think that's interesting because it's good to see that the MPI is actually being used practically to make a difference on the ground, on the most marginalized and most vulnerable communities. Sami, I just want to bring you into the discussion quickly. One of the challenges we face, so it's good to see that Egypt's actually using the MPI at the local level and using this to tackle poverty, using this for social development. But at the global landscape, we're not hearing too much about Islamic finance, which is clearly something is happening in the space of Islamic finance, but it's not being captured. We're not seeing too much of that happening, or we're not aware of it. So any thoughts on that, Sami, on the role of Islamic finance?
Thank you, Arif. Let me first mention that good economics is Islamic economics, and good finance is Islamic finance. Fighting poverty is one of the core values of Islamic finance, even if we do not call it Islamic. So this is Islamic by nature. Whether or not we describe it, it is by nature, it is Islamic. That is one important thing. However, your remark, Brother Arif, is actually very relevant, because when the Islamic finance movement started about 40 years ago, their main concern was how to fight riba or usury. And therefore, they started with banks, because if we Islamize banks, we get rid of riba, we get rid of usury, and therefore we get an Islamic financial system. While the appropriate sequence was to start with social institutions, zakat and awqaf, that would fight poverty and build the social cohesion among members of the society. And this would build the foundations for commercial and for-profit financing that is, conducive to economic growth. Now we have awareness of this lack of balance, and the Islamic Development Bank Group is leading several initiatives to support these social initiatives, and this MPI is one of those.
I know also the Institute's working with the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data and the OECD. You want to share some thoughts on that as well, or take that for the next stage? Okay, Sabina, back to the global MPI. Now, one of the challenges that we faced in the work that was done is we are constrained by the lack of timely data, and the global MPI, as you've mentioned up front, is a homogeneous view, pretty much assuming the countries are all the same, using the same set of indicators. So useful to have the differentiation between the global and the national MPI. Now, in terms of monetary poverty, we've heard multiple fora during the annual meeting. Everyone's talking about it. In terms of monetary poverty, we've witnessed massive backslides into extreme poverty. It would be interesting to hear your thoughts on the impact of COVID and now also the East European crisis on multidimensional poverty. I know data is an issue, but do we expect the impact to be the same across each of the dimensions, or similar intensity as we're seeing on monetary poverty, or are we expecting some dimensions to deteriorate more than others? So if you could just talk us through that, and then maybe once you've done that, talk us a little bit about through the outcomes of the work on Egypt from the global MPI and what we've seen from that study.
Yes, thank you so much. So COVID clearly impacts food security and hence nutrition. And many governments have food security or nutrition as an indicator, and we know the increases. Also, initially, COVID put children out of school, but in some countries they haven't returned to school, particularly the older children who may have entered the workforce or maybe too far behind. And so it has a worrying impact on child cognitive development, educational development. And then there are things like work. Many governments have work and employment in their national MPI, and informal job loss is clearly an impact of COVID and of the current crises. So these are some of the impacts. We have simulated them in many countries. In some countries we have updated data and have been able to track them. And so this has been an area of very active research we could say more about. But I'd like to turn to Egypt and the global multidimensional poverty measure, bearing in mind it is not the accurate one, and our colleague from the Ministry of Planning and Economics.
Sabina, before we get into the Egypt case, let me just welcome Dr. Kamali. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Kamali, Deputy Minister, Ministry of Economic Planning and Development. Welcome. Thank you for taking the time out. I know your schedule is quite hectic, but before we actually, Sabina, before you go into the Egypt case and some of the outcomes of the work done there, let me just bring you straight into the deep end, Dr. Kamali.
Sure.
We know that Egypt embarked on an exercise to develop its own MPI. We've heard from Mr. Ashmawi on the role that the social bank is playing in terms of trying to implement, using the MPI to better target interventions. Now, why would Egypt go down the MPI route? What are some of the benefits that you're seeing, and what are some of the challenges, lessons learned that you could share with us? So, throwing you straight into the deep end.
No, thank you very much. It's an honor to be here, and I'm very happy to be part of this distinguished panel. This is actually a very important question. First, let me apologize for being a bit late, because I was told that it's going to be postponed. But anyway, I'm happy to be here. This is a very important question. Actually, there is a focus from quite some time on on monetary poverty, And monetary poverty just measure part of poverty or the need. So this is why it is very important to not only focus on monetary poverty, but on the multidimensional poverty. The efforts that Egypt is doing, especially in the last 5 years, they focus very much on the multidimensionality of poverty. It is very important to remember that poverty is a phenomenon that is associated with something that is rooted. There are reasons behind the poverty. So a poor person, in terms of income, the reason behind the poverty is something associated with education, something associated with health, with, in general, opportunities. There is they miss opportunities, and when they miss, they didn't get the opportunities to improve and raise their income. Now, what Egypt is trying to do, and this is actually is very much, you can see it in the last Egypt Human Development Report. It's that when we look at development, we look at development from the perspective that it's the right of everyone. The right of everyone to have a quality schooling, quality health services. Now, the effect of something like this is that over time, what's going to happen is that this is going to reduce the monetary poverty. So we cannot just only focus on the poverty from a income perspective. We have to look at the multidimensional poverty, because what is being done in Egypt in terms of the efforts on the level of development, in terms of roads, infrastructure, or the project that is associated with water, sewage, good quality education, health services. This is something, these are efforts that very much affecting and reducing the multidimensional poverty. And this is why the government of Egypt and the Ministry of Planning and Economic Development is trying to capture this, try to show that this is something that has witnessed a drastic and significant change in the last 3 to 4 years. The kind of problem that we have, maybe you have talked about this, that we face, is that there are a number of entities that have different methodology when measuring multidimensional poverty. And this is why it was an initiative from the Ministry of Planning and Economic Development is to bring, and OFI was part of this initiative, is to bring the institutions that are very much interested in measuring the multidimensional poverty and trying to come up with a agreed upon methodology, and in order to see what happened to multidimensional poverty over time, and the effect, and this is something very, very important, and the effect of the government initiatives on multidimensional poverty. It is very, very important to see the impact. When we try to measure something, it's not only the implementation of projects. The most important thing is the impact of the project.
Which brings me to a very important point. Sabina, when we're talking of impact, what are you seeing from the global MPI for Egypt itself?
So in the global MPI, we have DHS data from 2008 and 2014. So this does not describe the current situation in Egypt. And it also is too acute a measure of poverty for Egypt. So the measure that Dr. Kamali outlined is a much more precise and tailored metric. But in 2008, 8% of people were poor by the global MPI, and it was less than 5% by 2014. So that is already a significant reduction in the MPI and in the headcount ratio of poverty. But what's interesting also is how poverty went down. Rural areas were the poorest. Poverty reduced among them the fastest. Children were the poorest. poverty reduced among children the fastest. Of the 24 governorates where we have changes over time, we find that in the poorest governance in 2008, which was Asuit, Beni Suef, Fayuma, and Menya, poverty reduced the fastest. For example, in Asuit, poverty was 19% in 2008, and it came down to 8.8% in 2014. It more than was cut by half in just 6 years. And of course, in the less poor provinces, there were also significant reductions in 13 of the 24. But they were leaving no one behind. And so this pattern of poverty reduction was very important. And the reduction was across all indicators, although it did show some differences between urban and rural areas in terms of sanitation or of water, which really are reflecting some ongoing climactic difficulties. The other interesting thing about Egypt is this was a time of strong population growth. And so you might think, well, poverty went down, but maybe the number of poor increased. No, there were 6.4 million people who were in poverty in 2008 and 4.4 in 2014. So 2 million people left poverty despite population growth. So again, it's a positive trend. So we are not saying that this is a perfect measure by any means. It's not accurate for Egypt, which should be rightly much more ambitious. And yet it shows the kind of insights that multidimensional metrics can give.
Sabina, I want to jump in there because I think what you make is a very useful point, that both in terms of absolute and relative poverty, we've seen good progress in Egypt, but equally important is the fact that it's going and targeting the most vulnerable and the areas where it's needed the most. Dr. Kamali, that information that Sabina shared is slightly dated. Clearly the global MPI has its limitations. The work on the national MPI, are we seeing similar sort of results coming out from the work being done at the national level?
Well, I think this is something that we have agreed upon the methodology, but I believe that the results are not yet public, and this is why it is very important to try to do that and try to finish the methodology in order to see what are the effects of, as I said, the initiatives on the ground. What Dr. Sabina has said, it's very important in the sense that there is a focus on the most or the poorest region in Egypt. And when you look at the Decent Life Initiative, Hayat Karima Initiative, it is the way that was in a way structured and designed, that we have the phase one is focusing on the poorest villages in Egypt. And the design of Decent Life Initiative is something that is focusing mainly on the MPI. So it's not, it's not just giving cash transfer, for example, to people, because cash transfer is something that maybe, and you know much better than me on this, but it has a short-term effect, right? It's like giving a painkiller, right? And then after that, what's going to happen? The effect of this is going to vanish, and the cycle of poverty is going to repeat itself.
They become dependent.
Right. If I want to break the cycle of poverty, I have to focus on the multidimensional poverty. Right? And this is the kind of the way that we think, the government of Egypt, the way that we think about poverty.
That's interesting, and I'm going to bring you back in here, Mr. Mohammed.
Yes, sir.
On the ground, what's happening? What are some of the initiatives that you are implementing through the social bank, through Nasser Social Bank, to
actually we
tackle
are
this?
not working alone. Our strategy is not driven by the bank; it's driven nationwide. For Hayat Karima is decent life for the Egyptian citizen. How we draft this strategy? We start to taking the element of the MBI. We analyze each governorate. What the type of services are offered there? Health service, education, post, even security. we ended up with a red zones. Yani we put a simple KPI where that each governorate has to enjoy 8 to 9 public services. We found some governorate, some cities that is missing a lot. We market it as a red zone and we start with it. This is completely changed now. Even there's villages that putting down, rebuilt from the scratch, providing schools, providing social services, providing social finance, providing education, providing support. Even the financial support, which Takaful Karama, which is now about 19 billion, is our aim to reduce it year by year by starting to target these families by giving them a chance to start to produce, and after 2 years we take them out from the poverty list. And actually this is going very well. So what we are doing now is we are working along with the government. We are in the map for the Haya Karima, and we are, as I told you, are Nasser Bank, established in 1972. Next month we'll celebrate 50 years of integration, and this is the first Sharia compliance established by the government in Egypt. Our role is diversified. As I told you, we are targeting the micro social saving, and this is a new concept. Saving means that you are encouraging people to deposit cash. No, you are creating the habit. You opening the accounts for them. You are collecting donation to be started as a seed fund. So this is type of it. Even for the senior citizen or the handicap, we are fully providing the account, the financial inclusion, and even the money itself. So, this is simply what Nasser Bank is doing. Is in the micro saving side, in the finance and microfinance side. We are in the investment side. We start to set up financial companies. That's social financial companies that is aiming for profit, but all the returns are directed to social funds. This is, you could say it as waqf, nadi in certain way. Now we have two big entities in Egypt, one for the disability in general. We are dealing with, we are in the sukuk side, we are in the direct investment side. Also, Nasser Bank is the Beit al-Mal. Beit al-Mal is inherited. Anybody who's passed away without having inheritors, we inherit him. This inheritance is will belong to the bank. We sell it or manage it and direct it all this fund for the social activities. Also, we are the last resort for families for being alimony. As you see, from a pure banking side to a social banking side, and merging the social part with the financial part.
And I think importantly what you raised is the issue that even at the national level, at the country level,
Yes.
partnerships are critical. You cannot do this alone.
Yes.
And both the depth and breadth of what you're doing is actually quite interesting and you know, really good work. And Sami, let me bring you back in here. We're seeing you know, we've heard Awqaf, Islamic finance, role of Islamic finance. What role are you seeing it playing? And we accept that good finance is Islamic finance, but what role are you seeing of Islamic finance in minimizing the impacts of the crisis on the poor and tackling the issue of multidimensional poverty?
So let me highlight one important thing. Why is it multidimensional? I studied economics in the US, and the mainstream economics says you can translate anything into money, right? That's the pro-market, approach. Everything can be sold or bought through converting it into money. You can price anything you would like. If we do this, we will miss the points that were raised by Sabina and Dr. Kamali and others, that there are deep issues, deep dimensions of poverty that cannot be measured through money. Money cannot measure everything. This is an Islamic value, but it's also a universal value. Michael Sandel of Harvard University, he wrote a book, What Money Cannot Buy. It's a very interesting book, but this theme, this is at the core of the controversy between the mainstream new classical economics and the other diverse schools of economics. It is a matter of fact, not a matter of opinion, that we cannot measure everything in money. And that's why we need multidimensional poverty. That's why we need social factors, we need education, we need data coming from satellites, as you indicated about the global partnership. It is not only money that you can measure through everything. So from an Islamic point of view, zakah is also multidimensional. There is zakah on money, there is zakah on animal production, there is zakah on agricultural production, and so on. And so it is, I really like the concept that the world is multidimensional, and we really have to address it from a multidimensional point of view. I hope that Islamic financial sector in general, including Awqaf and Zakah, would catch up with these very important aspects. Technology is one way to catch up, one way to translate these important concepts into practical means. So let's hope that fintech would be valuable in closing these gaps.
Dr. Kamali, I'm going to bring you back in here. We've heard of impressive gains from the global perspective. Mr. Muhammad has already spoken about some of the key initiatives. So we're seeing some good success stories coming out of Egypt. Put you on the spot. What's driving all of this now? And then would you be willing to share some of that experience with our other member countries?
I think the first thing that we should kind of consider that we should first realize that there is a problem. The first thing that in order to solve something is to understand that there is a kind of understanding that this indeed it is a problem. Now, the government of Egypt, when poverty went up in 2018, and it was not a very easy time. Right? The government came and announced that poverty rate in Egypt went up. And actually, I went in national TV and I talked about this. We have to have transparency. This is the first thing that we should do. We cannot hide the facts. We have to face our problems. But we face our problems, but at the same time, we have to have our eyes focusing on the solutions for the problem, right? And the way to do this is that to be scientific. Let's see what are the factors driving poverty in Egypt. Whether you're talking about income poverty or material poverty or multidimensional poverty. So, and actually, in this TV encounter, I talked about this. There was an interesting, actually, study done by UNICEF on the factors affecting poverty in Egypt, and it was based on data on the household income survey. Now, and what the government did is trying to, and we can talk about these factors. What the government did is that tried to get to the root of the problem. So it's like, for example, any macroeconomic problem, like inflation. Inflation, when you try to solve inflation, inflation per se is a phenomenon, but you have to go deeper and analyze what are the sources of the inflation. Same thing for poverty, right? You have to go down deeper and try to understand what are the sources of poverty. This is what we did actually in Egypt, right? We looked at the different sources of poverty, or the factors leading to people getting into poverty, and what are the factors that make people get out of poverty. And we try to design our programs, especially social protection, in a way to, you know, tackle these factors. So this is that. And by the way, data is extremely important, very, very important, and allowing data for different, not only in Egypt, not only in between us and the government. It is very important to have this, how can I say, this partnership between the government, between the different international organizations, development partners, in order to have something that is solid, that is based on facts. Now, what we promote in Egypt all the time is that we need to have policies that is based on data, right? Based on facts. And this is what we, and this is actually this is what we are doing. So, and by the way, as you know, all the panelists talked about this, all things are interdependent in a way. We cannot just look. So, if, for example, we're talking about poverty, you have to look at education. And Tekaful and Karama, by the way, right? This is a system that was implemented in Egypt. This conditional cash transfer, right? It's in order to, I give you money, right, or I give the poor money, they need to do certain things. They need to send their kids to school. We need to break this, the poverty, right, trap, in a way, get out of the poverty trap. This is the way that we kind of handle the problem. And it is, as I said, it's not a problem. All countries have their own problems. It's very important to identify them and to tackle them in a scientific.
Dr. Kamali, you're raising a couple of very interesting points that I don't want us to miss. The one is being bold enough to acknowledge you have a problem. The second thing is doing a proper diagnostic to understand why and what are the key bottlenecks, and then coming up with how best to relax those binding constraints once you've identified them. Yes. But equally important, and we've heard this coming through from several of the panelists, is that this is not something you can tackle alone. It has to be looked at holistically. It has to be looked at much more broadly, and we have to be honest with ourselves and move forward. Now, this is easier said than done. It takes courage from any government to publicly acknowledge that actually, you know, the numbers are higher, and we need to do something about it, and this is what we're doing. So coming up with a clear plan, being holistic, the concept of evidence-based decision-making, I think clearly Egypt is leading the way in terms of the multidimensional poverty. And Sabina, maybe just bring you in on this. What are your thoughts on you know, evidence-based decision-making and what Egypt has been doing? And, you know, also probably Egypt's role on the MPI, you know, trying to get this a bit further. Any thoughts on that?
I think three thoughts. First, I really liked what the president of the IDB said at the beginning about innovation and empathy or solidarity, because one reading of multidimensional poverty in Egypt is, in a sense, that there is a greater empathy for people. And so articulating poverty is also articulating a commitment, an expression of solidarity with them, and not diagnosing an embarrassing problem, but actually something that you're coming alongside with. The second is that monetary and multidimensional poverty sometimes diverge. So I mentioned the global MPI trends from 2008 to 2014, and I'm no expert on monetary poverty in Egypt, so I'm embarrassed to say it in front of Dr. Kamali, but my understanding is from 2008-9 to 2015, there were monetary poverty statistics, and they showed an increase in monetary poverty in the same period that multidimensional poverty decreased. And that's because if you put a child in school, it's a long time before that child comes out, earns an income, and monetary poverty adjusts. If you put a child into nutrition, again, there's a lag, but a multidimensional poverty catches the effects of decent life and other programs immediately. And so the hope is that by using both of these measures together, there can be a more precise take. Finally, I would say that we have the honor to be Secretariat of a 61-country South-South network, and the Ministry of Planning and Economic Development will be hosting those meetings here. And whether it's CAPMAS or the Ministry, there will be many other countries very interested to learn from your experience, from how you have measured, from how there's been coordination with your policies, and the many, many policies that you have implemented. And so, again, I know that many are hoping for a knowledge exchange with you as you move forward.
So maybe on the knowledge exchange, I just want to put an ISDB group spin on this. Reverse linkages is one of our flagship programs where we try and take, good knowledge experience from a country that's really doing well in something and use that to build the knowledge and capacities in the third country. So again, Dr. Kamali. Ready to stand up and help our other member countries share their experience.
Of course, this is something we believe very much in South cooperation, and I have to say, before joining the ministry, I was in the UN, I was in ASCO, and I discovered that there are in the Arab countries in the region and in the Middle East, there are so many experiences, so many success stories, and also in Africa. Right? It is extremely important to benefit from these success stories. Sharing the knowledge, it is extremely important.
Building the capacity.
Sorry?
Building the capacity.
Yeah, of course. But building the capacity for countries that are similar. They have the same problems. They have the kind of same challenges. So we need to kind of look among ourselves for the solutions. So partnership, and I believe very much in partnership between countries, between the countries and international community. This is the way to solve problems. And as I said, it is something that's going to strengthen very much the relationship between countries. Having people missions to understand success stories and try to replicate these success stories in other countries. This is extremely important, and we are very happy to do something like this because, and I'm sure that in many countries it is the same thing. There are lots of bright spots, right? But we need to kind of identify them and to promote them.
So it's identify, share, and celebrate the successes. And we could go on for hours with this discussion, but I'm sure the audience wants to ask a couple of questions. So let's just go to the audience and take 2 or 3 questions, and then we'll come back. Heidi, there's one on that side afterwards.
Well, thank you for this interesting discussion. My quick question to Dr. Suelem. In fact, of course, the common concept for this Islamic finance and the microfinance for the implementation in different countries, I spotted throughout the times, and there is a different concept related to what is the interpretation of riba, usually. So, with all due respect of all this, each country has its own, let's say, Sharia institution or Dar Ifta or similar entities. And why I'm saying that, because this the good understanding of the concept may encourage people. I'm talking, for instance, for the deposit for the master bank, for instance, or similar institution, or our local banks which has Islamic branches. So, and we have seen that.
Can we get to the question? Or what is the?
Yeah, the question is that how can this, how to unify the concept as much as possible, so to embed it in the spirit of the population, so that they can go ahead and accept the investment in this area, whether private sector or persons or entities, which will encourage the implementation of your program. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We'll take another question. Sam, I'll give you a bit of time to think through that one. That's like how you're going to find world peace, right? So let's take another question on the other side.
Je voudrais d'abord féliciter
toute l'équipe.
Vous savez, quand les non-spécialistes suivent les questions de pauvreté, ils sont très accrochés. J'ai une préoccupation, c'est de savoir entre les solutions ciblées et les solutions globales dans la lutte contre la pauvreté, quelles sont les meilleures approches efficaces. Je pose la question parce que nos pays, il est très difficile d'identifier exactement les plus pauvres parmi une population où la majorité est pauvre, et parce que souvent nos pays sont très fragiles. Aujourd'hui, une frange de la population peut être considérée comme non pauvre, mais plus tard elle peut devenir pauvre à cause des chocs que les pays subissent. Donc, je voudrais donc avoir des éclaircissements là-dessus. Je vous remercie.
I guess to maybe Dr. Sabina. I think it should be the one that could answer this question.
Assalamualaikum. My name is Marsudi Suhud from Indonesia. As my experience to reduce the poverty through social organization. In Indonesia, there are two big organizations, Muslim organization like Nahdlatul Ulama and Muhammadiyah, and also there are like NU organization has Islamic boarding school, Ma'ahid, Al-Islam. We empower them and make a channeling from the bank for the society who are they still poor through this Islamic boarding school cooperation. Like what I did last year, I just come to one of the Syariah bank and then I said, there are 5 cooperation in the Islamic boarding school who manage microfinance. Then I bring them to the bank and the bank make a channeling for this program. And I think it is as a model that can improve their economic through the rural area, villager, that they have a product until they can sell their product to the market. And actually they cannot do by themselves because they need how to manage, how to make to develop their economy, to make a good product, and then they can sell together.
I think the
bank here then can do together, hand in hand, with the microfinance in the village.
Okay.
Thank you.
The Indonesian example is an interesting one, and I think we should look at another knowledge sharing session and how best to replicate that model along with the model from Egypt. So Sami, let me go back to you on responding to the first question.
We always tend to think how to unify. I think we should be thinking how to diversify. We need to institute diversity, and in my opinion, multi-dimensional poverty is one way to look at multiple dimensions. On this occasion, if you allow me, Arif, I would like to commend and value the initiatives and the efforts by the Egyptian authorities in implementing and measuring multi-dimensional poverty index. Yes, poverty is a big problem everywhere, but there is a very good work has been done in Egypt, and we hope through the regional hub that was inaugurated last night that Egypt would lead the building the human capital and capacity for close countries within the domain of the regional hub. Thank you very much.
Egypt, as Sabina mentioned in her earlier intervention, is hosting the multidimensional poverty peer network later this year. So that will bring the world together in Cairo for a discussion on sharing some of that knowledge and experiences.
Thank you. I would like to add something, Yani. By building the model of the multi-dimensions, we start for the first to identify the diagnostic, to identify the how to start, the roadmap, and the modeling itself. Now we are facing a very nice problem, is the technology. We are dealing with C and C minus level customers. We start to see them asking for online sales, asking for wallets, asking for technology. This is why we are signing with the Islamic Bank for knowledge transfer and supporting in the technology transformation of the bank. So the deep analysis and scientific analysis, now we are proud that we reached another problem, that the consumers, the customers, the people who are targeting them, now they are asking them for more, asking us for more. They are asking us for technology, asking us for online sales. This is by the concept of align. Now we are joining and we are forming technology companies specialized in the micro savings, specializing in the micro finance. This is something I'd like to share it with you, that the technologies became now one of the multi-dimension poverty.
I can see the moderator for the second session giving me the eagle eye and asking me to wrap up. So maybe the questions that we haven't tackled, there's one for you, Sabina. Maybe we can tackle this after the session with the individual. So maybe just a 30-second soundbite. Dr. Kamali, we'll start with you. 30-second soundbite, your thoughts on a way forward and how to tackle the problem. I know it's going to take longer than 30 seconds, but...
Okay, you almost put me on the spot. I
just need to know I'm allowed to get the flight out.
No, as I said, it is the way forward. I think it's let's continue our cooperation. It is having something, such an event. It shows the power of cooperation between there is a very important SDG, but maybe lots of people do not pay attention to it. This is SDG 17.
Yeah.
This is the partnership to reach the goals. It's very important to have partnership. Yeah. Partnership is extremely important, whether you're talking about the government, private sector, civil society, the international community. It is extremely important to have this partnership between different entities, because we cannot reach our strategic objectives by ourselves. Very important, evidence-based policy. It is extremely important to focus all the time on trying to have evidence-based policy, because this is the thing that is going to have an impact, right? And third thing, and this is very much tied to this, let's try to be transparent, especially in terms of data. It's very important to share the data with researchers, with of course the government. They have access to data, but researchers, international communities, very important that we disseminate. The data dissemination is extremely important.
That's why it's wonderful to have a solid economist in the role of driving policy and taking policy decisions. Mr. Muhammad Ishmawi, 30-second soundbite from you. Any thoughts on the way forward?
As we said before, the name of the game is cooperation, the aligning up. The name is how to consolidate our effort in identifying the problem, in building the roadmap, and in interference itself. So, we as Nasser Social Bank, I think we are very successful in building consolidation with all the government entity, beside the civil world societies. And يعني we are very proud that we introduced, the first time we introduced the social saving in Nasr, يعني where the people, the zakah, the sadaqah are directed to build saving for the poverty. Thank you.
Sabina?
Thank you. Somebody said we need to consolidate, and the multidimensional poverty measure brings under one roof a set of priorities, and so you can see overall has it gone up or down. But in terms of evidence-based policies, we start with poor people, and their lives, their deprivation loads are several. And so we know, and we now can measure what they are, how they differ by governance, by different states or provinces. And so in a fiscally constrained time, we know how to invest in the most effective way to have the integrated policies that will address their particular shape of deprivations and move the needle on poverty. And so bringing together the evidence and the data, the solidarity and empathy, and the policy needs, I think is something that is exciting about this group.
Dr. Sami, last but not least.
Well, I think as Sabina mentioned, the values driving the whole project of multidimensional poverty are the essence. It is the empathy, the social solidarity that is essential for driving this or making this effort successful. I think that's how we connect this session with the next session on social entrepreneurship and innovation, and how to really bring value to new technologies and applications for fighting poverty.
I think that's a great segue to the next panel. Rami, apologies if I've taken a bit more time, and just if you could join me in thanking the panel. Absolutely wonderful.
We actually want to thank you for this excellent moderation.
So I'm allowed to get onto the flight on the way out. But I think before I wrap up, Rami, sorry, I'm going to take one more second. I think, if we can just wrap this all up in, and Dr. Kamal, you've actually made my life very easy, right? Not for any other reason, but you pretty much wrapped it up, right? Partnerships, evidence-based data, and being honest. And Dr. Sami sort of encompassed all of that with a set of morals and values and solidarity. And I think that's what it's all about. And working together, we can actually tackle this problem.
Can I say something in
You're the boss.
10 seconds. There is something that research that was done in Egypt from quite some time, but I don't know whether it is continued or not, on social capital and the effect of social capital. I think social capital is extremely important. And the effect of social capital in countries like ours is extremely important. This is very much associated with the bank and the Islamic way of looking at things. Sorry.
Thank you. That's a perfect segue to the next round. Thank you very much, one and all.
Thank you very much, Arif, and the panel for this very good session. Before going to the second session, I will invite the audience for the launch of MOOC, a massive online open course on Islamic finance and the SDGs. So we'll open this course, and then followed by a very short presentation by our colleagues in the UNDP, and then we'll start the second session, inshallah, on social entrepreneurship and social innovation. If you don't mind, we'll start the presentation on the book, and then we'll go to the second session, please.
Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, welcome. Welcome our launch event for Massive Open Online course, Islamic Finance for Sustainable Development Goals. Before starting the session, I will be in 5 minutes give you information about this project. You just watch the video. Let me give you more information about this course. I think the presentation will come in few minutes. This is Fatma Çınar. By the way, I am Islamic Finance Portfolio Lead in United Nations Development Program, Istanbul International Center, Private Sector in Development. Excellent. Just a background information about the initiative of Islamic Development Bank and UNDP in 2016 to establishing Global Islamic Finance and Impact Investing Platform, which is under the thematic areas of Impact Investment, Islamic Finance Portfolio. The intention and vision of the platform is integrating Islamic finance and impact investing ecosystem together to enable necessary financing for sustainable development goals. And the current activities under Islamic Finance Portfolio team, the mainly Green Sukuk Initiative, evidence-based research, Islamic finance and impact investing training, which we in person and virtually conducted in the mentioned countries, Pakistan, Indonesia, Morocco, Turkey, and planning to more. Massive Open Online course, today's event, I'll give more details, and technical assistance services to sovereigns, to ministries, and to private sector representatives for specific areas like we worked on microfinance, Green Sukuk Initiative, and Green Sukuk Framework with several countries. I would like to give more details about the MOOC and just go over the training modules. Those are specific training modules which are tailor-made for the needs of the institutions. That could be from a microfinance perspective, you may be in a conversion process, or in your country, you are planning to enhancing a specific institution, you are in need of modeling your system, your team, your capacity in terms of specific area under Islamic finance. So the Islamic finance portfolio most welcome to support you for such activities. Those are specific programs which we conducted in Djibouti for Islamic microfinance assessment study, covering the training for trainers, and necessary pre-assessment and assessment studies. In Afghanistan, I was in Afghanistan last week. We conducted a validation meeting for our microfinance project, which is conversion of microfinance institution in Afghanistan to Islamic microfinance institution. This is the program validated with both international and local stakeholders. Now, I would like to come to the massive open online course. This is very important because in Islamic finance and sustainable development course, definitely we are in need of necessary training to understand what are the relations technically and a capacity. And we try to give a wide range of outlook, as Mr. Sami Suwailim highlighted, the diversity of having the issues topic while collaborating together. This training program exactly reflecting the diversity of Islamic finance and sustainable finance ecosystem. And it is very first of its kind as a massive open online course because the main concentrating on development professionals and Islamic finance stakeholders, having them under the roof of sustainable development. And the project conducted with Islamic Development Bank and UNDP with the support of Islamic Development Bank Science, Technology and Innovation Fund, and with the partnership of Durham University, Islamic Development Bank Institute, and UNDP Istanbul International Center for Private Sector in Development. And then when we look at the content of the program, we have 27 course instructors. Those are specific experts from international institutions, mainly reflecting their background and knowledge about Islamic finance, impact in investing, and sustainable finance. We have our authors and lecturers from 11 countries, 3 continents, and we have 5 modules, 13 lessons, and 11 case studies. Totally, the production is 740 minutes. And the production will be channeled through ISDB's edX channel, UNDP Learning for Nature, and also as a library for getting PDF format or necessary documentation of the training from STG Academy Library. And the course will be free and public. You see the screen from edX channel. It is now at uploading process, and in soon, within this month, in June, we are expecting to finalize and deliver the course to your good self. Those are the welcome from our partners at the project, and thanks for their valuable contribution and guidance. Under the modules, we have sustainable development goals and the role of Islamic finance. So we are trying to reflect the resemblance of principles and ethical foundations of Islamic finance to sustainable development goals. And we have showcases, best practice examples with the case studies of Islamic microfinance institutions, which is the exact implementation of sustainable development goals. And in Module 3, we are touching the modes and institutions of Islamic finance. We are coming to the Islamic commercial and social instruments, give a more understanding about the capacity of Islamic finance, and also we are touching the impact of those products and services, which is mentioned, highlighted in impact investing, not a financial return, but also social, environmental, and impact to the society, which we show economic and social empowerment, as well as in humanitarian crisis, how those products under Islamic finance applied to the transactions and to the programs. And also we are explains the governance structure in Islamic commercial and social finance sectors, and also of course as a banking sector, which is the core sector in Islamic finance, we are having some applications from the representatives of those institutions. And we are coming Islamic impact investing and Islamic finance. We are trying to show you how they converge each other in terms of blending finance and in terms of impact measurement, impact management and measurement size. Definitely monitoring tools very important at this site. So we are providing specific standards, metrics, how could be applied at your institutions. And of course, we are supporting all necessary training with the case studies. Those are the live case studies, not just the academic or just, those are the transactions, institutions, and programs which applied and experienced ones. Now we are coming to multilateral organizations' perspective for engaging in Islamic finance. As you see from our lecturers, they are reflecting their engagement for Islamic finance with their institutions, team, and specific programs. I would like to just touch our outreach plan, which is critical. As you see, this training course will be useful and used for all the institutions mentioned here. We already started our pilot stage with specific institutions, like in Turkey, Participation Bank Association of Turkey. We are planning to go with Bahrain and other countries who would be interested to also have on board these training programs for their personnel. And also we are in touch with universities, which can be utilized as a course at the universities, like we are in connection with Malaysia, Indonesia, and in specific countries to have this program at their courses. And now I'm very happy that this is as part of our outreach plan. We are not today here having our lunch together. We already shared our program with Sarajevo Business Forum at COMSEC meeting, and we are also planning to do our announcement at United Nations General Assembly. And you can reach us from our social media accounts, and we will be also updating you about our activities under Islamic finance and impact investment through our channels. You are most welcome to join our platform, Global Islamic Finance and Impact Investment, which we will deliver all news updates, reports, publications, and trainings about the topic. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sister Fatma. Now we will start the second session on social innovation and social entrepreneurship. So let me invite the respected speakers, Dr. Ayman Sabah and Dr. Saba Subhani, please. Yeah, thank you very much. So at the beginning, I would like to apologize on behalf of our two speakers who were not able to join us, but we will have the time to benefit from the presence of Mr. Sahba Subhani and Dr. Ayman Saba. So thank you very much for accepting our invitation. Let me start by introducing our speakers, our panelists. So we are pleased today to have Mr. Sahba Subhani, who is the director of the UNDP Istanbul International Center for Private Sector in Development. Mr. Subhani has 19 years of experience in the private sector in Silicon Valley, Singapore, and at the UNDP as program advisor, team leader, and program manager, including technical lead for the recently endorsed UNDP private sector strategy. Mr. Subhani, thank you very much for accepting our invitation.
It's a real honor to be here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We are very pleased also to have Dr. Ayman Saba. Dr. Ayman is the co-founder and CEO of the Egyptian social enterprise Shamsiya, a problem solver of challenges facing healthcare that creates participatory technology-enabled solutions, putting patients and their needs front and center. Through his work as right to patient to health researcher, he is leading a number of research and advocacy efforts that aim at guaranteeing the realization of the right to health to Egyptians, giving them access to universal healthcare coverage and ensuring their rights are protected. Thank you very much, Mr. Ayman, to be with us. Thank you very much. Let me start by, for the benefit of the audience, by one question, a general question, because everyone knows what is social and what is innovation and what is entrepreneurship. But saying social entrepreneurship and social innovation is something which is relatively new. So let me start by Dr. Ayman. From your perspective, what is social innovation and what is social entrepreneurship?
Perfect. Thank you very much. So when we're tackling challenges that are facing the development sector, and especially in our case, healthcare challenges, this is a problem with layers of complexities, تعقيدات. And complex problems require rather advanced solutions. So what kind of complexities we're talking about in this case? First of all, there's a dynamic complexity, which means that the problem itself changes in time and in places. If we're talking about access to healthcare in rural areas presents challenges that are different in urban areas, and in time, 10 years ago, the situation is very different from today. So this is the dynamic complexity. There is also what we call a generative complexity, which means that the problem is new and therefore it requires new solutions as well. There is also a social complexity, which means that the problem relates to people. People affect the problem and they are affected by it. And so when we want to design a solution with this kind of complexities in mind, this solution needs to be addressing the dynamic complexity, in this case based on evidence, based on research, based on data. It needs also to be innovative in order to address the generative complexity, and this is why innovation is critical in this case, because you can't solve new problems with old solutions. And since these problems relate to people, since they are social, the only way to address this is through a fully participatory methods that involves the communities. This is what social innovation is for me. The way to solve these complex social problems. Now, in order to do that, the common market dynamics that govern investment and capital attribution may not be sufficient to address these gaps, because, as mentioned in the session earlier, it is quite difficult to put a monetary value to access of services and to the measures that are needed to be carried out in order to make sure that the right to health is given to everyone. And so including aspects related to the social and developmental and the impact that can be driven on people's life needs to be accounted for, and only social entrepreneurship can do that.
Yes, thank you. Alluding to the earlier point that the previous panel made, that the entry in terms of Islamic approach was around finance and banking, I think this is a complementary approach. I was lucky to be with Mr. Al-Barak, the director of Kuwait Turkish Bank in Konya, the birthplace of Rumi, last week, where we're launching the first green sukuk bond, municipal bond in the world, inshallah, with the community, with the mayor and everything. So you had an ecosystem around this transaction. But what was very clear to me is that when you talk about Islamic entrepreneurship, it is a community-based approach. And very social, so all social entrepreneurship is, which is a very new phenomenon that everyone is promoting, is very much at the heart and root of the Islamic approach. Now, what is clear about it, it's not about profit maximization. The characteristics, it's to target social objectives, which we know through various Islamic institutions, Waqf and others you've done. I think that's what's distinctive with the model of the West, and maybe in our part of the world, is there's a concept of a hero who will go and change things in a community, when we know it takes a village, or it takes, as we say in Africa or others, it takes a group to come together. So it's not about profit maximization, it's reinvested. It's mainly, you see, nonprofit structures, and the surplus you reinvest it, so earn income strategy. I think that you see different forms of this phenomenon. Now, in terms of social innovation, it can be related to business models, but social innovation goes also beyond business model, if you want to change. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. This is very interesting regarding the for-profit world. Now we are in this world where everyone is looking for profit. We are seeing that many aspects of life, especially in the social aspect, are getting worse. We have poverty, we have inequalities, etc. From your perspective, what is the single change that we have that has to be made in order to allow social entrepreneurship to participate in resolving these kind of issues? Maybe I'll start by okay, Raymond, please.
Sure. So, what needs to change? First of all, I think the key difference between normal business or business as usual or the for-profit model of business and social entrepreneurship is not in the revenue generation or the profitability. I believe both need to be financially sustainable, and this is what distinguishes them from traditional charity. Now, the difference or the key difference in my opinion is how does revenue generation how is it positioned in the mission statement of the organization? Is the goal of the organization to generate revenue, or is revenue generation a mean to a social end? This is really the key difference. For example, if I'm working in the healthcare sector, my goal can be to satisfy the needs of my shareholders and therefore to generate revenues and generate profits for them. Or I might need to generate revenue in order to spend it on the social ventures and the social activities, and in order to expand the coverage of my services to cover people who may not have the means for it. In both cases, I need the same amount of revenues. In fact, I believe that social enterprises should be allowed to request and to need more funds and more investments, because spending on social causes may not in many cases be as financially lucrative as in other business needs. If I'm designing a solution to address a social challenge, I am primarily focusing on social challenges with problems that are not addressed and where the market did not see value in addressing. And so it needs to be accounting for that. What needs to change is this very specific mindset that when we calculate the value or the return on investment of a social enterprise, we account for two things: revenue generated or financial return on investment, but also social impact and social return on investments, which can and cannot in some cases be monetized.
Great. I mean, related to this, 3 points: business model, impact monitoring, and understanding sort of the nature of the entity, legal entity. Business model, you can see certain sector, let's say delivery of childcare services, where a non-profit maximizing approach ensures inclusion versus a profit maximizing. You don't want in the telecom sector to have we have to be careful, not everything is called social enterprise. Related to that, it has to do with the legal structure. Are we talking about a non-profit, trust, or for-profit? We know in some instances, non-profit have pure business activities, but the revenue generation, I know in the US some non-profits have their CEOs make more money than for-profit. So we have to be very cognizant of the legal entity. And the third has to do with the impact. What do we mean by impact? The social justice inclusion has to be part of the business model. Let's say if you have a child care company, sort of a social enterprise that also provides care for, a cross-subsidized model, we have to ensure that it is meeting its social goal. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's very interesting indeed, and we have to find this balance between the profit seeking or maximization and the social impact. This leads us to the problem of financing, how to find a way to finance this kind of activities and to have this collaboration or the balance that the government or the state has to make, and what to do itself and what to leave to the private sector. But this leads me to a question to Brother Sahba regarding the financing. How do you see the way to finance this kind of activities? And if you can kindly give us some thoughts about the role of Islamic finance that can bring to this kind of solutions.
As I mentioned, the notion of social enterprise as these heroes, individuals that just come and start things and is a new phenomenon is not correct. Do you know that the IFC finances the activities of the Catholic Church in Colombia? The largest hospital are managed a nonprofit with significant earned income strategy where they can rely on financing from, let's say, IFC. You can also have, in certain contexts, charities who can issue like a social impact bond, in the UK and others. The other one, I think, there's crowdsourcing approaches towards financing. I mean, if you're talking about, usually there's a grant element, and then there's also, of course, concessional loans. So there's different financing structures that are dependent on different sort of legal entities and of course the country context. One thing we did for the G20, we talked about the importance of trying to understand what is the appropriate legal sort of setup for such entities. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's very interesting indeed, and let's go to a very specific case, the very interesting case of Shamsia in Egypt. So, Dr. Ayman, if you can kindly give us more details about the concept, how it works, how you have had the idea of creating Shamsia, and how have you been able to have some impact on the ground?
Sure. So I studied medicine. I graduated from Cairo University Medical School back in 2007, and during my years as a medical student, I was involved in student activities, as I'm sure many of you were. And when you're working in healthcare, when you're studying medicine, you're by nature confronted with very difficult cases of patients who are suffering, who don't have the financial means to get treated. University hospitals in Egypt have the best doctors in the country, but the worst infrastructure and resources as well. And so you are faced with these massive amounts of injustices and inequities. And when you want to do something about it, the first instinct is to go through charity, is to say we're going to raise money in order to buy medications or do surgeries for patients. And then you realize not only is this massively expensive and requires lots of resources, it is absolutely not sustainable. If you do this once, you're going to do this all the time, because you are helping people to access the services, but you are absolutely destroying any sort of chance for them to be empowered citizens claiming their right. They are seeing firsthand that the only way for them to access services is to rely on charitable giving, done out of empathy, out of compassion, not out of right. And this is really the spark that really hit me in this sense. So after graduation, I immediately studied international health systems management, and based on the work in the social sector during my medical school years, after that, I wanted to build an organization that addresses these inequities through sustainable models that do not create parallel tracks, but rather enforce the idea of empowerment, enforcement of participatory involvement of patients in their treatment, and holding officials and holding governments and holding service providers accountable to delivering these rights. So Shamsia started in 2011 with the goal of involving people in the design and in the monitoring of the healthcare services they receive. We started by a project called eghospitals.com, which is a community monitoring tool for hospitals. We basically train local members in society on a process that turns them into what we call mystery patients. They go and they receive the services in their local hospitals, and in the meantime, they are evaluating them through 128 very specific set of criteria. And then we publish these results to the management of the hospital and on a public website, which guides service providers and service beneficiaries alike in improving quality of services and in choosing where to go. We then built on this what I call the GPS of the healthcare system, a navigation service that helps people who need medical services in navigating through the complexity of the Egyptian medical healthcare system, in being enrolled in the health insurance or healthcare coverage scheme that they are entitled to, and in benefiting from these services. So it's like we are lawyers or agents for these patients. We take their hand in accessing the services that they are entitled to from the national schemes, from the rights that they have, and we help and support the national schemes into delivering these services. This is the kind of work that we do very broadly.
Yeah, thank you very much. So, if I understand well, it is like you are putting pressure on the health services providers to be up to the level of providing good services.
In some instances, we put pressure, but in most instances, we directly support. So we directly support those entities in providing services that are impactful, and we integrate the different systems together without creating parallel tracks. So for example, if I'm a charitable donor that wants to help a number of patients undergo surgeries, and I'm willing to pay, for example, 100,000 pounds for this, I can help 2 patients do surgeries, or I can help 100 patients access the same surgery by integrating them in the national scheme, by telling them that they have the right to health insurance, enrolling them to it, supporting the healthcare system in providing these services, and improving the utilization rates of these services. Do you know that in Egypt, it is estimated that 63% of people are entitled to health insurance, yet the utilization rates of these services do not exceed 8%. This is because many people don't know they are entitled to these services, don't trust the quality, or simply get lost in the bureaucracy. This is what we're trying to help.
Yeah, thank you very much. As you know, we at the ISDB, as a international institution organization, so we have 57 member countries. So we would like to benefit from your presence and from your experience to maybe transfer this experience to other countries. What kind of challenges you have faced at the beginning when you have started, and what do you expect from the government, for example, to help?
Well, first of all, the main challenge is to explain what we do, because you know, in order to be a social entrepreneur, you have to be able to speak at least 2 languages. You have to be able to speak the language of investors, and you have to be able to speak the language of charities and, you know, NGOs. And what we're trying to do is we are trying to tell people that your charitable givings can be more impactful if they are allocated into smarter, more efficient ways. And we're also telling traditional investors that you can make more returns, you can be more effective in your investments if you address these social challenges. So the main challenge was to actually learn these languages and begin adopting them in our narratives. Of course, there are, you know, administrative and, you know, some logistical challenges related to the laws regarding social enterprises, you know, but these things in the end, they evolve. And I think the mere fact that we are in a session that discusses social innovation with the presence of representatives from the government, it shows that we're in the right track in that regard. I believe there's a new law that is in discussion for social enterprises. So this is being solved. What remains is really to be able to address the language barrier, if I say.
Brother Sahba, we talked about the role of government and how can help this kind of initiatives, etc. But from the international perspective, how do you see the role of international organizations? How can they help this kind of initiatives and social entrepreneurship?
So I won't give you a technocratic answer. 4 points. One is culture eats strategy for lunch, and we're going to be going to lunch. So it's quite important that we understand what social entrepreneurship means in the ISDB countries. I was just looking at the literature. There's ad hoc references in the context of Islamic sort of finance. We're talking about Islamic social finance by bringing it together. What I mean is related to that, we need to understand what are the business models. There are business models, you said, there are things that the governments can do to deliver that can be supported and buttressed by social enterprises with the right sort of financing structure that can be taken to scale. You don't want to replace some of these. There are others where the social, the other point is that you see in Africa and other places that there's money going towards, let's say, private education for the poor, which is revolving 1 or 2 individuals who come from outside and try to set up, and it doesn't work. Maybe there's an alternative way, which is community-based or through a faith-based organization that can be taken to scale, you know? So business model is important, understanding where it is public, what is non-profit maximizing, and what is for-profit. And I think the third element is the ecosystem of the actors has to be coming together. And related to that, I think if you look at Islamic finance, not only is overlaps with the aims and objectives, but we have very specific instruments. You know, you have to look at how you can use waqf, zakat, qadr hasan, asset-based financing, all of these various for these goods. So these are the parameters of engagement.
Thank you very much. Another question which is very interesting, I believe, regarding these kind of social impact initiatives and actions. From the government perspective, they have to have a balance between what the government has to do itself and what it should leave to the private sector maybe, and with the risk of failure maybe sometimes. because there is nothing that guarantees that what the private sector should do can give the expected impact. So, Dr. Ayman, how do you see this kind of balance, or the decision is very difficult from your experience? Maybe I know this is a debatable question, but this is very interesting.
I can talk from the perspective of the healthcare sector in particular, and it can be taken as an example in that case. I believe that the main role the government should play in this regard is the role of a regulator. There are significant market failures related to healthcare. You know, when we discuss healthcare, if you're going to buy a mobile phone, for example, you know exactly what you want. You want a camera with, 10 megapixels, the battery needs to be long, etc. And based on this, when you go to buy that, you know exactly how much money you should spend on it. And so the person who sells you the mobile phone can't really trick you that much, because you have the same the same amount of information. In healthcare, there is what is called asymmetry of information, which means that you as a patient, you go to the doctor, you get examined, and if the doctor tells you you have a problem with your feet that is affecting your brain, you have absolutely no way to verify that. And if he tells you you need a surgery that will cost you all the money that your family has and will have in the future, there is no way for you to verify if this is true or not. This is what we call asymmetry of information, and it's inherent in healthcare. You can go verify by another doctor, but in the end, you still don't have the information. You have to rely on what people tell you. This asymmetry of information makes the healthcare sector highly a source of suffering when it comes to the gap between knowledge and in terms of abuses that can happen. There is something that is called moral hazard, which means that the doctor who prescribes the medicine or the surgery benefits from prescribing that. There is also a number of abuses that can happen from the patient when they have insurance, for example, and such. And so, in the end, the role of the government in this market is to make sure it is very well regulated and to address these different asymmetries. It can sometimes play a role in delivering the services in order to balance things, but it should never relinquish its role as a regulator for the healthcare system and for this market to protect people from such inequities. I think this is the major role the government should focus on.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, I mean, related to that in terms of new types of instruments and its impact, like output-based aid is one, performance-based. So instead of giving money in the healthcare sector to an entity, you say if you perform on these. I mean, for water, it works very well. Okay, have access to clean water. But I was in Afghanistan 3 weeks ago, and they were telling me that all the previous output-based aid initiatives led to all these unnecessary cycle of surgeries and operations and this and this. So I think it goes back to the point is we need to have the evidence of what it's more difficult in the health sector. But I want to use one concrete example in terms of how governments can do things. In India, for example, the government wanted to provide access to health to sort of low-income population. So they gave concessional land to the top 10 chains to build hospitals, and they say 10% of the poor, 10% of your client base should be the poor. Of course, that didn't work out because the tension for these for-profit companies, and then the government had to sue all of them, right? It didn't. That model of PPP based on concessional land did not work out. Alternatively, the government created a different model, which was basically a digital payment system, and part of the national coverage for insurance. They work with all kinds of hospitals and say, look, if you have a patient, we'll ensure that you get money quickly into at a lower cost and structure. That model was much more effective in terms of scaling because it had a different sort of incentive system, and it took into account the specificities also the private profit maximization model.
It's very interesting and leads to the issue of innovation. So social innovation takes care of the way we are proceeding and the tools that we are using. So how do you see this role in countries like Afghanistan, you said, or in Egypt, how you have been based on this innovation to help you achieve your objectives?
Well, I mean, if you are implementing a social intervention that has to do with people, you have to be able to listen to them. We always say in our organization that we need to believe that people are expert in their own needs. there is no need for me to bring an expert to tell me what people in a local community need. I simply need to be able to ask this question and to analyze the answers. Because if I'm designing a system and I'm pushing it on people, people end up trying to counteract the system, trying to maneuver their way through the system in order to get what they want. But if I design the system in a way that responds to that directly, this is the best, I'm getting the best way, the best chances of this solution to work. And so by listening to people, by designing solutions that people understand, and I think this is where Islamic financing have a major role and can play a major role, because it can include a vocabulary and notions that people like, that people have positive affinity to, that has to do with their religion, that has to do with their belief, but that also capture the essence of their culture. And by using these methods and by using these models and expanding them, we can achieve sustainable solutions to the problems because they have been responsive to the needs and culture of the local communities.
And we've had examples of this. The IsDB and UNDP have been working with Trine, which is an energy crowdsourced financing sort of organization that finances large wholesalers of energy platform. Like in Nigeria, leveraging sort of Islamic finance, basically you had money coming in, but also it was embedded at the community level also. So it's a combination of community embedded, social enterprises, organizations, leverage of Islamic finance instruments, and the right ecosystem of partners.
Yeah.
And I think we raised around $3 million on that. So you tap into that because people lend each other money socially. I mean, why is it that when there's, I think when there's financial crises, and I don't know if I'll be on TV, but when I was in Afghanistan, I said, my God, what hit the country in terms of sanctions, if that had to hit other countries, the whole countries would collapse. But because we had that resilience and social fabric, people even with less money have been able to, it's a very bad situation, but it could have been worse.
Yeah. So before maybe giving you the final word, maybe we'll give the floor to the audience if there is any question to be asked to Dr. Ayman and the Sahaba. I'll come to you first.
Can't hear you.
Yes, Assalamu alaikum. My name is Nizar Zaidan. I work for the Islamic Development Bank, and my question is to Dr. Ayman. I did not really get very well about your economic model, how you generate income, how you of course you generate income not to make profit, but at least to sustain your business. So the question here, how are you, as I said, generating resources basically to continue your operations? Thank you.
You have a question here and another one here. Yes.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Mohammed Lamin, President African Institute of Islamic Finance in Senegal. My question is relates to, I know in the previous panel, Dr. Sraim defined Islamic economics as the right approach of Islamic economics should be through waqf, zakat, and the social. And this is unfortunately against the trend, because I think the trend of development Islamic finance is right now converting conventional into getting rid of riba. And so my question is maybe to the panel, using innovation, social entrepreneurship, what should be done to reverse the trend related to what Mr. Ayman said earlier, that they should both look at the needs of generating revenues, but the main goal should be the social sharing of revenues.
Thank you. We have a question here, and then the others.
Good morning. Assalamu alaikum. My name is Aisha from Nigeria. I'm interested in a comment that was made by Mr. Subhani? Yes. Okay. Yeah, you started earlier on saying something like, culture eats strategy for lunch. Then at the end of what you said, culture helps build resilience. So for a country like Nigeria that has very strong religious and cultural practices, what would you say, hang on to culture because that has helped us actually to be resilient, or discard culture for strategy? So I'm a bit like, it's a contradiction. What do we do? Thank you.
So how do you respond? I think then we can do another round of questions
yes,
before we forget.
let's
We can
take these
start with
questions.
business model with you.
Yes.
Then I can take those two questions. Go ahead.
Sure. So how do we make money? Our business model evolved. So we've been working now for 10 years and we've been relying on organic growth. We did not receive any investments per se. It's a good thing because we've been profitable or breaking even since day one, but it also has a drawback, which is scalability. Now, our main sources of income right now are three things, depending on the different projects that we have. So we have projects that are relying on grants and funds from development agencies. This is when we have to present the direct social return on investment for this project, and we have to make sure it aligns with the purposes and goals and objectives of these programs. The second source of income is, in some cases, internal projects with clear business models, and some of them are profitable. So we design solutions, for example, for hospitals, for chains of insurance service providers and such, to address specific problems and challenges they have in their services. For example, we have a tool for patient experience management, and now we are starting its first round of investment in order to scale it up. So this is a project with a pure business model, and the revenues it generates allow us to carry out the social ventures that we have as well. And the third model is consultancies. So we have a pool of experts, and we have a pool of a team that is very knowledgeable in this case, and in many cases we provide consultancies that allow us to pay the bills in the end. The drawback behind consultancies, of course, is that it takes effort, it takes time from our team, which distracts in some cases from the core of what we do. But in some cases we have to adapt and we have to deal with it. So that's, yeah, but it's not easy.
Yeah, thank you, Simon. Maybe on the question regarding the culture.
Yeah. Basically, just as an example, what I mean is a lot of businesses or UN agency or ISDB, we have big strategies to introduce products. Like on micro insurance, I remember 10 years ago in India, we worked with Allianz to introduce life insurance. And the default was that the husband is the sort of beneficiary. And then in the interview, they said, listen, this is like a weapon of mass destruction. You should change it from default from a husband to children, because you're giving an incentive for all kinds of domestic violence. So this is a point about you have to understand culture. I think when you think about, so how does culture get defined? We need to understand, when we talk about who are the entrepreneurs, it is the people in the communities. It is, yes, from large business people to small. I'll give you a concrete example. My aunt runs the largest intellectual baccalaureate school in Togo, your neighboring country. She started from a daycare in her backyard 30 years ago, 40 years ago. She's built it to where it is. She teaches other people how to start daycares. She has a whole program. There's no charity in it. She doesn't charge, but she wants them. And she says, in the communities, you need to learn. I started in my backyard. I didn't buy a building. I started like this. You can do it yourself. Building the confidence. So you have all these women entrepreneurs who are starting to build daycare, sharing with them the tips of what? A strategy approach will come with a very formulaic in terms of how to roll out, but she understands how you can build this in that context. So you do need strategy, but it has to be informed by culture, business model, impact measurement, and all of these things. Yeah. Now, related to your point, I think related to that, we do need a proper study endorsed by ISDB. I don't know if there is, where we look at how these various social finance can be linked to, how would I say, these different business models, Islamic social finance. And ideally, I think there's a question of trust. I mean, we work more on the banking side than the social finance, because if players like us come in the middle of this, we have to be very careful in terms of how we approach it. So maybe you need some kind of a facility and mechanism to encourage this. I found it, I was on Facebook all of a sudden, because I read a lot of stuff from West Africa, I see all these ads coming about crowdsourcing from the diaspora, like a Senegalese football player in Spain trying to do things in Senegal and other things. But they need to have partners of choice like us to make these happen. Thank you very much.
Yeah, to link it to the course that we have already announced, we have to show that Islamic finance, in the heart of the objective of Islamic finance, is to achieve these kind of objectives. Because we had this mentality of having Islamic finance only from banks or for financing, but at the heart of it, we have these final objectives related to social impact. So let's take another round of questions. I think we start here and I'll come to you.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Dua Hafiz. I'm Executive Committee member of FCI, formerly known as Factoring Chain International, and the General Manager of Egypt Factors. My question to Dr. Ayman, first of all, I would like to thank you so much about this initiative. It's quite impressive. I'm quite impressive about it. But as a local person, maybe it's my fault. This is the first time to hear about it, which is sad for me, because if I start to know about this good program, I will be so much involved as a person in doing my part in increasing my interaction to this social program. So maybe it's my fault, because as you know, Dr. Ayman, some of the community members, once it's a healthcare related issue, they are more relying on the private sector, unfortunately, which is not fair to a big part of our community. But my question is, how can we increase the visibility of this program? How can you guarantee more that a lot of other local community are willing and will be very much happy to participate more in putting their feedbacks and accelerating the progress of such a program? Thank you so much.
Yeah, maybe we'll take another question and then. Yeah.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Sumaru Khairanga. I'm a director of Jaiz Bank. Jaiz Bank is a non-interest financial institution in Nigeria. I have 3 questions for Ayman and some of the speakers. First of all, in a world where there are so many competing needs, which sector of the society, in terms of youth, women, refugees, or farmers, can organizations like IsDB and entrepreneurs that facilitate a social initiative targets for best results? That is one. The second question is on social entrepreneurship, which I believe sounds contradictory to me when you are bringing social entrepreneur, because we expect social initiatives to de-emphasize the issue of profit, while entrepreneurship focus on maximizing profit. Can social entrepreneurs aim to maximize profit? If the answer is no, what should be the driver of social entrepreneurship? And lastly, how can organizations like in a heavily impacted countries of sub-Saharan Africa assess the IsDB social entrepreneurs services? What avenues are there for partnership with the IsDB in this aspect? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Maybe last question here.
Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum.
Salam.
In fact, I received an invitation for this forum. I came to represent my institution. I work in the World Health Organization in Geneva, but I wanted to share some few contribution from my previous experience as a development economist in my country, in Senegal. What I consider from the various statements is that we seem to be missing a fundamental principle, which is laying not only Islamic finance, but Islamic activities, which is equity. And we know this equity is missing in most of what we are proposing in terms of policy solutions to populations. And that equity, in the formulation or in the statements of the solution we're providing, it may often be diverted by the fact that we're saying Islamic finance, so that others who are not Muslim may feel that they are excluded, while the principle of equity itself, at least if we go back to the reference of the Quran, لِيَقُمَ النَّاسُ بِالْقِسْطِ, it considers everybody in the nation or in the community. Now, from my personal experience, some of the government solutions we were proposing were diverted through a public sector filter, where population who are at the grassroots, who have capacities, do not receive the kind of support that even the international financial institutions are directed to them. So how could we bring back this equity issue, which, I mean, for those who are interested in the literature, they can go back to Amartya Sen or to Robert Chambers, they will find it. It's all over the place, but we seem to be missing this in all these solutions we're talking about. So there's a kind of disconnect between the macro level, where government are designing policies, they are organizing dialogue like this one with IFIs, and then population at the grassroots are waiting. And when you look at the distribution of the resources in the country, it's not that there's no resources, it's that the distribution is not sufficiently productive for those countries. I mean, if you go back, for instance, to Amartya Sen, this demonstration of why Ethiopia was not suffering from famine, but from skewed distribution, this is what I'm talking about. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Last question, please.
Thank you. Mr. Gom from South Sudan. I have represented my GDT company. I'm the CEO of the company and the partners of the company. My question is going to Dr. Saba. What is the moral obligations if the regulate the health sector to be a profitable sectors? And then Dr. Rami mentions the obligation of the charity to the poor communities. What are the best models that can be adopted to consider them as social entities? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. To Rayman, yes, we'll start with the question on Shamsiya.
Sure. Okay, I'll try to remember the different points. So, first of all, thank you very much, and it's not your fault that you don't know about that, simply because, as I mentioned, the main challenge behind social enterprises is their capacity to scale. Just in the region, we have seen maybe a couple of weeks ago how investment money is poured on startups and organizations, mostly profitable, in order to achieve scalability, visibility, to acquire new clients, and sometimes they even use a very provocative term to me, which is capital burn, or burn rate. And when you're talking about a social enterprise, you are taught from the very beginning to use very lean management processes. You are extremely efficient in your resources, in order to sustain your work and to make sure you achieve the most impact with the least resources. I had to learn to code, I had to learn to design, I had to do the field work at the very beginning, and it was very important to have this versatility, because sometimes you don't have the resources to do things. And when you're spending this effort and the money with limited resources in order to achieve this impact, sadly, visibility comes at the last of these priorities. Now, there are things that can be done more in order to achieve that, of course, and a big part of the responsibility is on us in this case. But I think this is changing as people are looking forward to hearing and to listening to solutions that are more sustainable in terms of the services that are providing. So to answer your question related to how can we reach out to local communities who may not hear about us using the normal ways, one of our key projects which gives access to insurance to people who don't know that they have access to these services right now, we are expanding it locally through local NGOs in rural and urban areas by partnering with local NGOs The project is called the NASAH, which is the navigation platform or the navigation tool for people to best benefit from the healthcare services. And what we do is that we basically take a couch. We bring a couch. We call it Cannabit al-Nasah or al-Nasah couch. And we donate it to the NGO. We train their staff into becoming the first line of navigation for the local communities. And therefore, we have this outreach. We have this immediate outreach using the current resources of the local NGOs. They simply have a couch and they receive patients who have problems dealing with the healthcare system or that require some interventions. They guide them into getting these services, and when things become a bit more complicated or they don't receive the services, they can escalate this to the national team, which can support them in this case. This way, this is where we're going right now in terms of our expansion, and this is why we are soliciting, support from different organizations, because we want to achieve the scalability, this local scalability using this model. Which brings me to the question regarding equity. Especially when it comes to healthcare, this is essential. How can we achieve equity? By going local, by going through participatory models. I have had the chance of implementing a very interesting intervention. We basically convinced a donor agency to put the funds they were going to allocate in improving healthcare service in the local community into actually the hands of the local community itself. So we carried out a number of sessions with selected and elected members from the local community, and we gave them the budget. We told them, if you have this budget, where would you want to spend it? We gave them access to information from the Ministry of Finance about the national budgets, about the resources that are available. We told them how to get the information they want in this case, and they had to design where they wanted to prioritize their spending and which project needs to be done with what kind of money. This creates an enormous amount of accountability, and it really drives equity forward because it's really from the bottom up. We believe in people, that they are expert in what they need, and therefore it is only fair to give them the chance to actually decide where the development funds need to go. So.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Maybe on the question from Jais.
I think you're asking the fundamental question of the Milton Friedman approach: the business of business is business, versus stakeholder capitalism. And but I mean, in a world of all these crises, business people who are business people, they're human beings, right? So in that context, the social and environmental responsibilities are part and parcel. One interesting study we did recently, we were looking at the sort of Turkish business person's approach in crisis versus some unnamed Asian. Basically in a crisis, the social standing of the business person to just fire people, they can't do that in Turkey, and it's reflected in terms of the Islamic philosophy. And in that unnamed Asian country, they had no problem. They revel in just getting rid of people in times of crisis. We were looking at natural floods. We're saying, look, if you provide disaster risk reduction and you protect then you will not impact your factory. People will not lose their job. They said, no problem. I have a factory in the other country, so it's okay. I get rid of people. That was in the other country. So I think here at ISDB, where you're talking about Islamic philosophy and approach, we have to be social in nature, and the future of the world is social, environmental, and business together. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So please join me to thank our speakers, Dr. Ayman, Brother Sahaba Subhani. Thank you very much, and looking forward for another.
Thank you, Brahmi, for your wonderful, Dr. Brahmi. By the way, I'm not a doctor. These two are doctors.
Okay, thank you. With this, we close the Global Forum for Islamic Finance. Thank you very much for your attendance, for your participation.